Hi, and welcome to In the Trenches. I'm Ron Herson, and I am excited to share this podcast with you, where we are interviewing design and experience professionals on how they build great products for all of us to use. And today, I'm excited to be joined by Eric Snowden, who's the VP of Digital Products at Adobe, where he oversees the Creative Cloud and the Document Cloud, a whole multidisciplinary team that bring all those products that we designers use to bring our products and services to life. So great to have you here. Welcome, Eric.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, to jump right in, we'll just do some quick fire questions. And the first one is one tip that you would give for design and product experience teams.
There's so many. I think the thing that I think about the most is the benefit of sunlight, bringing stuff out in the open, talking honestly, sharing frequently and early in the process solves so many problems that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. So just being open and transparent, I think, is a huge, huge thing to think about.
All right. So how about a tip that you'd give to the leaders of those teams?
I think sometimes when you reach scale, you lose contact with individuals. And I think the investment you can make into bringing a smart person into your company or keeping a smart person from leaving, that little amount of time has a huge return on investment. So don't lose sight of that.
Right, absolutely. And then, okay, so now we're going to go down to the level of the creative and product experience professionals themselves, the people doing the work. One tip for them.
I think agreeing on principles and what everybody's trying to accomplish up front before a single pixel is drawn, a single line of code is written is so important. Just having that clarity and leaving no room for ambiguity. Sometimes you have to go slow to go fast.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So now let's look at the competencies that you'd expect when you're looking to hire these design professionals or even leaders. What are three things that you look for when you're out there hiring and building your teams? Because you have an amazing culture and a reputation for great culture within your teams across Adobe as well.
I think we hire all sorts of different kinds of people. I would say we do hire a lot of generalists. I think that's something that I've always believed in, and certainly in certain areas like 3D or augmented reality, we have like specialists because that's required. But I believe in really well-rounded people. I like hiring curious people who have a learning mindset. That's incredibly important to me. I look for collaboration and the ability to work within a team. I think that's super crucial. And I think people who are excited about and believe in the mission of Adobe. I think, talent is obviously an aspect to all of that, but I would rather have somebody who's curious and excited and driven, who's willing to learn than some super talented person with a huge ego. I think that's really what we look for is humble people to do great work.
Right. Do you think that changes a little bit as you look at the high growth team? So I know that your teams, you have very established products and then products that are just taking off. Do you look for different things?
I think there's certainly different teams that we look at in very different ways. I think when it comes to some of the products we make, they're highly specialized and there's an amount of domain knowledge that is required. The canonical example I always give is 3D. I think having a sense and an understanding of that space, in addition to being a great designer, is almost a prerequisite. Either you have to come in with it or you have to be curious enough to learn it. And we've seen generalists come into those teams and spend a year in the trenches and really become great 3D artists in addition to great designers. I think there are areas like motion and illustration where you absolutely need to hire specialists. But I think it's like a recipe. Every team is a little bit different. Every team has different ingredients. Every team needs different ingredients. So I don't know that in my mind, there's a real formula for that. I think it's a case by case basis.
All right. So in this interview, I'm going to go through a few themes. And the first one I want to jump out is tools. So what tools are your teams using today that they weren't using before? And what's one tool that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I mean, my product design team, we're all standardized on Adobe XD. We are using and designing our tools every day. And I think there's a huge benefit to us being, we call our team customer zero, right? We're the first line of defense for the millions of people using Adobe tools out in the world. And we're constantly giving feedback and working directly with product engineers on the features we need to do our jobs. And so we have that added benefit of having the ear of the people, the engineering team and the product teams on the same tools we use. And that's been really huge. Obviously, we use Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, sort of the full Adobe suite, but because it's a product design team, we're really sort of focused around Adobe XD. I think, at Max this year, we announced, a pretty big move into the web for Adobe. And I think I get really excited about that, not just for my team, but for the world at large, like having both from a capital A or lowercase a accessibility standpoint, the fact that more and more people will be able to use these tools, that it will be available to more people. I think that's a huge shift in creativity, and I'm excited to see Adobe take some, big steps along that journey.
So I'm glad you brought up accessibility. It's one of those areas that they don't spend a bunch of time teaching it in school. And people kind of learn on the job. How do you, acquire or get your teams to acquire the skills and make it a priority that your products are accessible?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have an inclusive design practice within Adobe Design. So we have designers and researchers that are focused on inclusivity of all forms, including accessibility. Many of them have an accessibility background, but are thinking much more broadly than that. Within our design team, every single person on the team has gone through inclusive design training. It is part of our onboarding. So every new hire goes through it as part of joining Adobe Design. Retroactively, we've gone back and made sure everyone who wasn't new also went through that training. And we're even sort of expanding that training beyond the design team. So I think, education is the key first step towards that. And then I think, we're really engaging deeply with specific teams around initiatives that we feel like are leaning into inclusivity. That may be a new web-based product where we can think about accessibility from day zero. That may be engaging with people in underserved communities to make sure that we're building products that are available to them. I think there's so many different ways to approach it, but I think having a dedicated team and dedicated people who literally this is their field of study is super crucial.
And how did that start? Was it sort of one person that championed it? Was it the organization woke up and realized, actually, this is important for many reasons?
I think it's a confluence of things, but I think it started with a couple of individuals that were very, very passionate about the space, and it was about giving them a team and visibility and a voice to say these things out loud. I also think, our world is changing. People are waking up to the fact that in the past, a lot of software companies haven't built for everyone. They built for a very narrow set of people. And I think that's a really important change that luckily our whole industry is going through. But we have some people at Adobe who are just incredibly passionate about this, and building that passion throughout the rest of the company and teaching everyone to think in a different way has been like a really exciting journey for me to watch from the design point of view.
So the next thing that we jump into is process and operations. When you think about the org, and I know the shifts as time shifts, as scaling shifts, but how do you organize teams? Are they hub and spoke? Are they a service bureau? Do you embed? And does it change across whether you're in high growth or more established businesses?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's my strong preference is an embedded model. While we're a centralized team, I want the designers to feel like they are a core part of the product team, that they're inseparable from product and program management and engineering and everything else. But having a centralized organization gives us fluidity to move and swarm on new opportunities. I think there are areas of growth where we have more of an agency model. I think that can manifest in a couple of ways. It can manifest in teams that are understaffed, so they can't actually have a truly embedded, one product manager to one designer model. It's just not feasible. And so they need to be more fluid. I think in areas of growth where things are changing, we end up doing squad models, like temporary squads that can swarm on things, and we can have designer pairings across teams to work together. And so I think there are different tools for every problem, right? Sometimes you need a hammer and sometimes you need a screwdriver. And that's the way I look at sort of these organizational models. But I think my strong preference is to have a truly embedded model where, there's no sunlight between product, design, and engineering, regardless of where they report from an organizational standpoint.
So the trade-off that you make sometimes when you have the embedded model is the design consistency and the culture of collaboration across designers that are on different teams. How do you create the consistency, and how do you create that esprit de corps across the design team when they're embedded?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at its foundation, just like most other modern product design teams, we have a really robust design system. And I think at Adobe, because of the number of products we have, the number of businesses, the number of surfaces, the level of complexity of what we do, we have a pretty deep and interconnected design system. And it's not just designs and sticker sheets, it's all the way down to they're building code and components, they're building plugins for XD and our other tools to integrate all the way from code to delivery. We have a full tool chain that we've built in order to operationalize our team, because at the scale we're working at with, many dozens, nearing probably hundreds of products, millions of icons. Just the scale we're working at is fairly unusual, even for companies that have operating systems. That tool chain and that process is really important. On top of that, we have a team called the Unified Experience team, and their entire job is to look at our products across specific platforms and look for inconsistencies, to look for breaks in workflows, to look for those opportunities, and to design better pathways. And that is a small SWAT team that can swarm on individual problems. Again, they can be from the design all the way up the design pattern at the sort of like the more visual level, down to workflows between products and how our products work together. And so that's been an important lever for us in the last couple of years, to bring our products to a more consistent place.
That's actually the first time I've heard of a team that's separate from any individual one team that's kind of creating consistency. So it does tie into this idea of how do you do product reviews? When do they show up to create this consistency? So let's go higher level, which is at which point are you doing design reviews or product reviews? Who's involved in those design reviews? Give us the sort of brass tacks of what your operating model is to make sure the products that and experiences that your teams are designing are excellent, as well as the business needs, and then when and how those happen.
Yeah, I'll say, maybe I'll start at the top, maybe with my sort of staff, and I'll go down the chain. I have at least monthly reviews with all of my teams. Like, for me, being involved in the work, seeing the work, being able to give feedback, not only is obviously an area where I feel like I can contribute, but also the fun part of my job, right? Like, I was in reviews earlier today where I'm seeing some things we're launching in 2022, and I'm like still kind of buzzing from it. It's really exciting. And but the way I see my role in those conversations is less about noodling on specific design details. I really leave that to my staff to do. It's on those connections. Like, I see my role is sort of connector between the dozen or so, directors or senior directors I have on my staff, who are all running businesses that could be companies at other places, right? Like, the size of some of our products, there are companies that would be excited to have entire companies that had the revenue of a Photoshop, for example. And so really thinking through like how I can bring those people together, how I can help them collaborate, how I can connect dots, because I just have a different, point of view than other people. That's where I focus. So I'm meeting monthly with every team. We also have a design leadership review once a week, right after our staff meeting, where we collectively look at work. And so going back to my very first point is, I think, transparency and collaboration and just generally sunlight on these things solves a lot of problems. I think beyond that, every one of my teams is doing at least weekly reviews with leadership. They're doing individual reviews with each other. We post a lot of early designs in Slack for feedback. There's sort of the formal review process, but there's a lot of informal conversations that are going on, which I really encourage. Like, I think we shouldn't be afraid to Slack a design to anyone in the company, including all the way up to our chief product officer, and say, we're in the middle of working on this before we get 6 months down the wrong road. let's make sure we're on the same page. And so I think taking the formality out of some of the reviews, and I don't mean from a stringency standpoint, but just the idea that you have to get, a number of people in a room for X amount of time, that's the only way to see work, especially in a remote world, is breaking down. We're also, recording videos of things and sending them around to each other. So we've really embraced like an asynchronous nature to review, and just openness to review across teams. Like, our reviews are fairly open. We bring in new people, we bring in PMs, we bring in other designers. Like, we just try to have a fairly open door policy when it comes to this stuff. And I think that helps out quite a bit. And then for the unified experience team specifically, we really try to task them with areas of complexity, things that like reviews or just gentle guidance won't get us past, right? And there are tons of instances where, because of time or just shifts in the products over the 30 plus years some of them have been out, we get out of sync, and this team can sort of jump in and really make a big change and push for consistency in areas that maybe we've sort of gotten out of sync with our products.
I'm seeing sort of a parallel on the engineering side to the architecture team, like the distinguished engineer. And imagine that the designers on that team, that unified experience team, are folks that have spent a lot of time inside your organization, or that you have a lot of respect for, that immediately can come in and solve problems, but look at things holistically. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's I love that, because yes, but I'm not sure I've ever actually thought about it in that way. But when I look at that team, everyone on that team, they are some of the most tenured people. And I don't mean from a years of experience standpoint, that's also true, but they've been at Adobe a long time. They know how things got to be the way they are. They know who to talk to. They have relationships with people, so they can bring up these challenges without coming across as, mutinous or confrontational. And I think that this team, we've seen it can be hard to hire into, because that breadth of knowledge, but maybe even more important than knowledge, like that trust is really key, right? Like, that team has to have a high level of trust with every other team if they're making recommendations across 20 different products at a given time.
So shifting to scale, because that seems like a tool that only a company at scale can really afford, because you have so many different product lines. Each one, like you said, could be its own, not each one, but many of them could be their own multi-billion-dollar businesses. How do you take product experience and shift it to true, customer experience, and then to sort of business experience? So that, the traditional, I design a screen, I design a flow, I design an experience, I design a business. Yeah. How have you shifted that across time inside of Adobe?
I think it's really interesting, because I think the way you articulated that is sort of how I think about my leadership team, because I think my goal at Adobe is to design a business. If I go down to my staff, they're really, designing these sort of broad ecosystems of products. And I think as you sort of go down the chain, you get to like sort of individual features at the bottom. And so I think how those things ladder up and how each level differs is mapped pretty closely to what you're thinking about. And I think it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge moving up that scale at times. I think you need the right support, and you need the right people that when the door is open for you, you walk in, sit at the table, and more importantly, like earn that seat and have something to contribute. And there are times where that can be really daunting and challenging for new design leaders, but I think you're there for a reason, and your opinions, even on things that aren't necessarily design, are really valid. I feel lucky that, when I was really sort of establishing my management style and my leadership style. At the time I was at Atlantic Records, and I was in a place where design wasn't put in a box. I was involved in new business deals, and I was involved in technology decisions, and I was running an engineering team, and I was involved in marketing, but building products within marketing. And so I got to try a lot of different things without, being told, oh, you're a designer. Like, why are you in this deal meeting, for an example? Like, I was never put in that box. And so I think coming to Behance and then a bigger company like Adobe, I never saw design as a limiting role. I never saw it as something that was only about the visuals or even about the experience. Like, the experience is affected by the business decisions and everything else. And I had a curiosity in that. And I, remember when I was at Atlantic Records 10 years ago, or 12 years ago, I think at this point, myself and one of my analytics partners gave a presentation at one of Adobe's early analytics summits about this Bruno Mars campaign we had done. And I was talking about how I got analytics training for all of my designers, and how data was more important for designers to learn than code. And 12 years ago, people looked at me like I was a crazy person. It was just like, that is not what a designer does. But it just seemed very clear to me that the way to make design decisions and the way to further our industry was by, like, fundamentally understanding the business in a way that I think design hadn't before. And I don't think this was a new idea or my idea, but it was something that I was really fighting for, and I still believe to this day. And so I think all of those different, like, possibilities for design are deeply interconnected, and the best designers sort of see that, and they see their roles influencing all the way up or down that chain, whichever way you look at it, as opposed to only having say in a small piece of that. And I think the designers that I see grow and really reach those top levels are people that can oscillate between the business and the details, if not in the same conversation, then in the same day. And that's a huge, when I find those people are really special, and we sort of do everything to bring them in and keep them at Adobe.
That's a great tip for young product experience professionals to say, okay, this is how you can grow your career, is don't limit yourself with these blinders on just one area. Have input and view yourself as responsible for everything. But what do you see the differentiated roles of product management versus product design, and where you begin and end, even if you are collaborating?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think I'll try not to say anything terribly controversial, but I think they're really fluid. And as someone who's been a VP of design and a VP of product, I don't think there's such a hard line between them. I think the best product managers help their design, but also engineering counterparts, focus on their craft and the things that they're uniquely good at, and try to offload as much of the rest of the responsibilities as possible. Now, that doesn't mean abdicating engineer and design's role in the overall experience or in the product itself, but it means, like, really making sure that you're finding the individual talents that the people on your team have and keeping them focused on what they can do that you can't do. But it has to be a partnership. It's legs on a stool, right? You need all three, and they all need to be the same length. And I think that's really, really important. The best people I've worked with understand that, like, design can bring more value to the customers if you do it correctly. It can build better products. It can help them exceed their KPIs. Like, design can make them look better and can make their products better. And so it's a win-win, right? Like if design comes in and helps you blow out your KPIs, like, who gets rewarded for that? The product managers. And I think the product managers who feel threatened by that are the ones who are missing the big picture, in my mind, right? Like, it's like all boats are rising together if you do it right.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of three in a box, where I like the legs of a stool, where they're all equal, and you start to find an engineer will have great inputs because they might see a way that they can get a product to market faster while still meeting the design objectives and the business objectives. But if you incorporate them early, it's that three-way partnership. And we started noticing that it ended up being sort of five in a box because research and content.
I feel really lucky at Adobe to work with some of the most creative people in the world, and I include our engineers in that. I think the things that have come out of the engineering teams at Adobe are as much art and creativity as a lot of the design work we do, and getting to spend time and talking in the details about creative tools and how they work, and meeting engineers that have these amazing creative backgrounds and are accomplished oil painters or video editors, I think is a really special part of being at Adobe. And I remember my very first creative tool I was working on was a drawing tool, and I was meeting with the lead engineer who, again, is this accomplished oil painter, was also like writing the drawing engine, and we were talking about the difference between a pencil and a pen. And I think it's something we all know like instinctively, but if you ever had to try to describe how a pencil is different than a pen using words, it becomes really complicated. You start talking about the nature of materials and how they function and how they react with the paper that they're put on. And a pencil sort of breaks apart, whereas ink is absorbing into paper. And I remember having a conversation where I was saying like, oh, this pencil isn't pencil-y enough, and trying to like really describe these core things. And while those conversations are really fun, you can only have them with people that have like the same level of understanding of creativity and materials. And I think engineering is always a creative pursuit. It's just a different expression using code versus pixels. But especially at Adobe, like we have an amazing research team, amazing engineers, and they bring new ideas to products all the time. Like it's very fluid between design and product and engineering. And that's one of the things that keeps me like excited and motivated working at Adobe, honestly.
So we have this partnership that happens within the product and engineering teams, but then that partnership extends to other teams as well. And I'd love to hear how you and your team work with the capital B brand side.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's so many different tendrils out, right? And we talk about product design engineering is often shorthand for other things. Like even within design, there's research, and we've got a prototyping team, and we've got a content strategy team, and we've got a design systems team. And then, so my team is responsible for the brand, so logos and icons, but also like the in product instantiation of our brand. But we have a close collaboration with our marketing team, who's doing all of the amazing work on Adobe.com and advertising and TV commercials and everything else. And we really try to think of a through line from that customer experience. If you see, an image in a commercial, is that the same thing that appears on our marketing pages? Is that the same thing that appears in our tutorials? And can we actually go all the way to the end to help you learn how to make that thing? Like, I think that through line from marketing to product to learning to sort of creation is really exciting, and something that we think about a lot. Like, how do we show you something incredibly inspiring, and then later on down the funnel help you learn how to make that thing, and then eventually take those skills to make something completely new and different that like doesn't exist. I think that through line is super critical for us.
And there's obviously natural tension that exists between the brand side of marketing, who are creative professionals, as well as the people building the product itself. Is there any structural things you put in place to make sure that you are sort of meeting in a certain amount of time, or passing documents one way or the other?
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything we're doing that's rocket science. Again, I really believe, when I think of the core principles of my organization, I really think about transparency, collaboration, and innovation are the three words I would use. And I think whenever it comes to engaging with our own teams or other teams, like transparency and collaboration solves a lot of problems. And it sounds simple, and maybe it is in theory, but not in practice. And I think just meeting frequently, sharing work openly and often, being clear about where one team starts and one team stops, writing things down. I mean, whenever I have a new member join my staff, we do an exercise where I write down what my job is and they write down what their job is, and we talk about it and make sure that we don't write down the same things unless it's intentional. And some of that can feel really like pedantic and overkill, but it solves an enormous amount of problems. And like so many of the problems I think we face, especially at scale, they're more misunderstandings than they are misalignment, or the things that go unspoken, or the things that we all assume that everyone knows, and we forget that we hired 20 people this year and we didn't tell any of them, right? So I just think having that open line of communication, transparency, showing stuff early, and then with the brand team specifically, like the shared understanding that we have, while they may both be design functions, they're incredibly different in the same way that, a front-end JavaScript developer is different than someone who's writing like machine learning code, or potentially someone who's writing like Objective-C for like super like deep processing, right? Like it just, and I think it's more well understood on the engineering side that these different disciplines are like not fundamentally different. People move between them. There are like brilliant coders who can write in all these different languages, but there are probably very few people who are equally skilled in all of them, and they end up specializing at some point. Like that's the same with design. Like there's a lot of, shared ways of working and shared history in a lot of ways, but how we work and why we work the way we do can be incredibly different for different reasons. And so again, it sounds so simple, but like acknowledging those things up front and being honest about who's good at what, who's doing what, where the responsibilities are, writing that stuff down, putting it in a place where everyone can see it, ends up solving a lot of problems I found.
So you're talking about sort of hiring, you mentioned hiring 20 people and not forgetting to tell them about your principles of collaboration. Um, you may not have the same challenge at Adobe that many folks have, but this great shift towards design having more influence and like ownership inside organizations, kind of started a lot with the launch of the iPhone in some ways, as I see it, but it still isn't where it could be, and it depends on the organization. How have you effectively argued for more design resources, or helped different parts of the organization realize that your team can be adding great amounts of value if they were to be given greater budget?
Well, I think it's really that latter point you said is really key. It's like, what value does design bring to the business, right? It can't be about we need more people because we need more people, which is like the argument I hear all the time, or we need more people because of XYZ. It's like, it may be a prioritization problem and not like a put more human beings against a problem, right? Like, oh, we're under resourced. It's like, well, do we need more resources? Do we need to do fewer things? Like those are different conversations. But in the instances where I think it's about finding places where teams are open to the conversation. It's about getting a couple of wins under your belt. It's about proving that you can help meet or beat the business metrics or customer experience metrics with great design. And then once you've proven that, scaling that model out. Like, you're not going to get 50 teams to come along at once. Pick one, pick two, like start somewhere and have that sort of like pedestal project that you can hold up and say, like, this is how it should be. And so figuring out where, yeah.
The pedestal project. What did you do? I love the story you're telling about how you had designers learn how to be data analysts in some ways. And do you tell me what you did with the pedestal project to make them the example of how teams should run?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about finding something that is already in motion often, right? Like, but what can you grab onto and use the existing momentum on? And often when I talk about consistency, like, our first principles always don't make it worse, right? Like, find something that is new and make sure that the new thing is better than the old thing before you go back and scrutinize like decades worth of old work. And you need to do that too, but like, start with something that's in motion, has momentum that you can build on. Find a product leader or an engineering leader or someone else who cares about design. It's unlikely that there's nobody in your organization anywhere that like cares about design. There's somebody who's like, I'm so glad you're here. Like, I work with design at my past company, or I see the value of it, or I want to be a different kind of leader. Like, find that person or those people, match them up with the best people you have, like set a really good example, agree on shared, again, roles, responsibilities, and goals, exceed those goals and then share the credit amongst product design and engineering, right? Like I think all of us make a huge difference. But I think it starts with like finding great partners. I mean, I think partnership is key. Like there's no team that can do this on their own. And so finding the right people, and don't start with the hardest thing first, right? Start with something that has momentum, where there are people you feel like are open to the conversation, align them with your best people. And then again, like when you're successful, because hopefully you will be, make sure the credit is shared and acknowledge the fact that like this wouldn't have happened if it was done a different way. And then I think if you can elevate those case studies, you start to build a case around like what design can do for the rest of the company.
And I imagine those metrics and cases are truly business centric. Like we delivered more conversions, more customers, greater CSAT, greater NPS.
Yeah, I think a lot of times they are, but there's also the um I don't mean softer from a tone perspective, but things like the discussion online, like tweets about your product, like other things. There are other things that are, they are measurable, but they're who's talking about your product and how are they talking about it? Like there are some things like that that I think are also really important. I think the perception of your product is your brand, right? It's not, brand isn't your logo, it's the experiences people have and how they, how they value or criticize those experiences. And so I think that's an important part as well. There are plenty of times where you can meet business metrics and either do harm to your brand or to your product. So that it has to be a balancing act. It can't all be about the numbers, or you end up in a situation where I think there are lots of companies in Silicon Valley that only care about those numbers, and they lead to really bad behaviors at times.
Mm.
And I think you have to have a balance of the numbers, but not at the expense of your principles and beliefs and ethics, right? You need all of those things together. And I think that's really crucial.
And so we're going to shift a bit to strategy. So in this topic, when you think about legacy products, which Adobe clearly has, leadership in many that have been around for a long time, we talked a little bit about building some of the continuity across those. But what about when you have to refresh something? So you're going back and you're saying, well, this product line's been around for a long time and it needs to be done. How do you prioritize the refreshing of those products, and what's the process you use?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like many other things, the audience for Adobe's products, we sort of, especially on the creative side, we lump into like, I mean, the industry likes to lump into a creative bucket, but like that bucket is incredibly diverse. If you think about the new parent who bought their very first digital camera because they want to take awesome pictures of their kid and has never done any of this before, and then you think of an Oscar-winning filmmaker who's got a 600-person crew and multiple editors editing like a film, like, yes, those are both creative people, but like putting them in the same bucket is kind of not right. And so I think, depending on that, the approach can be very different. I think the sort of counterintuitive thing that I've learned is like once a product has hit a certain level of complexity, adding to it versus changing it can often make it easier to use. And so an example of that is, a couple of years ago in Illustrator, we decided we wanted to introduce a properties panel, a unified experience where, it is context aware. It shows the context of whatever you're doing. You're not basically chasing down panels. It's a fairly common construct across multiple products, but 5 or 6 years ago, when we did this in Illustrator, it was new to our sort of existing tools. There were two different approaches we could have taken. We could have said, hey, we built this new panel, we got rid of all the old stuff because this is better. We redesigned it. Or we could take the approach that we did. We looked at Illustrator, and at the time, I think it had, I'll get the number wrong, but 47 panels, something like that. I'm like, is a 48th panel actually going to make the product more complicated? Not really, right? Like it's a needle and a stack of needles at that point. Like one more doesn't make a meaningful difference. But what it does do is it gives the user optionality.
Mm-hmm.
They can decide, like, I want to use this new panel that in many, many, many ways is superior to what we have. But for the people that are like, I've built my literal like livelihood, my business on top of the way things work right now, we are not changing it for those people. And so what we saw was most people, existing and new, like a huge percentage of people chose the new way of working
Mm.
because for most people it was better. But for those who are like, I need 75 panels because I've got 4 monitors, I've got them laid out exactly the way I want. I've got everything perfectly sized. I've got muscle memory as to how far my panel is away from my toolbar. Like, this is a musical instrument. It's like moving the keys on a piano, right? And so we really need to be careful of that. And so we really learned that adding and giving people that optionality versus like taking something away and pretending like we know better was the right way to go. And we were really successful. People were really happy. The usage rates on it are like one of the highest things that I've ever worked at this company. But I think that's the path forward on a lot of things is we give people a new way, we show them, we lean into it, we explain why it's better, and we give them a way to say like, no, thank you, I like the way things are. And I think that is often the best approach with these things.
I love that example of moving the keys on the keyboard of a piano.
Yeah.
Who moved my cheese kind of story. So,
Yeah.
But that there is some point when you say, gosh, we have all of this legacy. The world has moved on, whether it's one of the shifts from sort of, desktop apps to web, et cetera. At what point do you recognize you need to make a wholesale change? And what are the inputs that would help you inform that decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe the example I'll use, there's a couple of good ones, whether it's Lightroom, sort of splintering off from Photoshop, or Adobe XD is a new product. The sort of most recent one that occurs to me is Adobe Fresco, which is a dedicated, painting and drawing application. And so for that, it was really, the Apple Pencil was like the moment, right? There had been styluses before, except for amongst like the highest high-end artists, they weren't really used. Everybody's still using their finger, and Apple really sort of changed the game on that. And we really looked at like the iPad Pro and some of the Microsoft devices that come with their stylus as drawing machines first and foremost. You like hand that to someone, you hand them a pencil and something, like it's very natural to want to draw. And so for that, it was a combination of like hardware, like that was really important. The hardware needed to exist in a way that like made sense to have something dedicated, and the market shifting from people predominantly drawing on very expensive, huge Wacom tablets, which are still super popular, but like the democratization of drawing technology was a big piece of that. And that was a moment where like we need a dedicated product for this. But again, we tried to be really smart about how we built something like Fresco, where it's built on top of the Photoshop engine in some way, so it can share Photoshop files. Like it's not a new file format where you have to think about compatibility. It has a number of brushing capabilities, including the Photoshop brushing engine out of the hood. So if you're like, I'm a Photoshop user and I like this dedicated iPad experience, we're not asking you to do an either or. You can use both together. And I think, again, going back to the Illustrator example, I think the commonality between these two things is optionality. We know that like we have a big, complex user base that have very different needs. Like we're going to give you choices. We often have a very strong recommendation as to which one is correct, but we don't assume we know everything about every single user in a way that we're going to be prescriptive of that. And so can we give them the best of these new devices, the best of the compatibility they want with their existing tools, and the best rethought experience without compromising too much on any of them? And it's a challenge, and it's a healthy tension, but we really want to make sure that people don't have to choose between the things they like and the new things. Like, how do we build like bridges between those? I think that's like super crucial for us. But when I think of XD or Lightroom or Fresco, and this isn't always the case, all of those were sort of hardware changes in some ways. Like the devices we use, whether it was Lightroom with digital cameras, XD with the iPhone and app design, or Fresco with many more devices having styluses and styluses becoming more accessible. Or I think of Adobe Aero and what Google and Apple are doing around, and other companies around augmented reality. Like the shifts in how people either create or consume often drive that we need a new product instead of the like just bolting on to what we already have today.
All right. Well, Eric, before we go, any last tips you have for folks out there from your sort of varied experience across this very complex and interrelated product line?
Yeah, there's probably so many, but I think, what I often come back to is the people on the team and the health of the team generally. Like, and I give talks all over the world about like running healthy design teams. It's something I feel really passionate about. Like building a product, as we all know, is not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? And it takes sometimes years to get things right if we ever get them right. And I think taking care of your people, building processes from the very beginning, not assuming that grinding people up is getting the best results, looking after your team, investing time, even at scale. Like I've, several hundred people that I'm responsible for at Adobe. But if I find out anyone at any level is leaving the company, I have a conversation with them. And that's something that everybody's like, you talk to everyone, and I'm like, every single person. Because what do I learn from that? I learn, are there any systemic problems that I should understand? Are there things that I can do better in my team? What is it about these other opportunities that they feel like they didn't have at Adobe? Is that something we can control in the case of, promotions and opportunities? Or is it a case where they just fundamentally wanted something different that we can't offer them? And I think, and it's also really important for me to say, I'll see you again soon, because it's a small industry. We all run into each other again. And Adobe has a really high rate of people leaving and coming back because the grass isn't always greener. And so I think there are lots of little things that I do as a leader, having office hours, again, talking to anyone who's leaving the company, taking one-on-one calls with like, not just key candidates, but high potential candidates at the IC level, personally doing the introduction to a lot of our new hires, like being visible and being open and having people know that if there's a problem, they can come to me, and I'm the kind of leader that cares and pays attention. I think is super crucial. And some of that is not that difficult to do, and you find don't happen very often. Like there are many cases where I'll personally talk to an IC candidate who I know is interviewing at other companies, and I know that I'm the only VP of design that is talking to this person directly. That's a huge advantage for us in hiring. And what is it, 30 minutes of my time to close a candidate who might transform an entire product or a business? Like a great use of my time, right? But like sometimes people don't see it that way. They focus on so many other things. And so I, spending time with my team and keeping my team happy and productive, like I'm one piece of this much bigger thing. And I think as you scale, I think many leaders start out that way. And then as they scale, they start to get distanced from, I guess, the humanity of their team in some ways. And like, I really try to make an effort to keep that connection. And that's just really important to me. And I think outside of the design part of what we do and the products we're shipping, like all of this comes back to having like well-directed, happy, like hopefully physically and mentally healthy individuals who care about your mission. And that is the foundation. And if you ignore that foundation, it'll erode. And so I like encourage people to not lose sight of that as their team scales.
Eric, what a wonderful example of servant leadership. And I'm grateful for you to take the time with us today. I think there's a ton of wisdom in what you shared. So I wanted to say thank you.
Well, and thank you so much for having me. And I really enjoyed the conversation.
All right, from In the Trenches, this has been Ron Herson and Eric Snowden from Adobe, and we'll see you on the next episode.